Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. This is Cybersecurity and Procurement. We're glad that you are here, glad that you joined us. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Before we begin, I'd like to just take a minute to do some housekeeping and explain the format. Attendees are muted. You can enter comments and questions in the chat box or Q&A. And we've got folks on deck for tech help if you're having any problems. If you'd like to ask the presenters any question, we will get to those at the end. You can just put those in the Q&A box there in your window. At the close of today's presentation, you will be asked to complete a brief survey, and your feedback is very valuable to us. It helps us make these webinars better, and it also gives you a chance to tell us the topics that you want us to cover in the future. Today's presentation is good for one UPVCC contact hour. To get your certificate, just complete the questionnaire following the presentation. And in case you haven't heard, we're still in the first quarter of the year, and so we want to remind you that we've got the Naspo Pulse blog going on, and we post every other week. We've also got the podcast that's going to kick off. March 23rd will be our first episode, and that will be with Roz Ingram, the Naspo board president. And we also have one of our stars of today's show, Leah McGrath. She'll be on a podcast episode as well. And Jamie Shore is still at the top of the ranks with the #1 most downloaded episode to date of the Naspo podcast. So she's still a reigning champ. Leah, we'll see if you can.
Yeah, she's hard to compete with.
And oh yeah, I have to give a plug for Naspo Exchange Conference. Tomorrow is the last day to register. So if you haven't already, make sure you do that. And let me go ahead and introduce today's presenters. We've got Jamie Shore, Chief Procurement Officer from the state of Maine and Naspo board member. We've got Dugan Petty, Cooperative Contracting Officer for Naspo Value Point, and Leah McGrath, Executive Director of StateRAMP. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jamie.
All right, thanks, Becca. Leah, do you want to go ahead and share the slides?
Absolutely.
And Becca, I would just add to my introduction, as most of the membership in Naspo is aware, it's Jamie Shore, CPO from the fabulous state of Maine, right? We got to get that fabulous in there. So thank you. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We are going to dive right in as we have a packed hour worth of information. We are going to do questions at the end. Leah, Dugan, and I will, we're going to throw out some information to you all about StateRAMP, making your security lives easier, making your procurement lives easier, and all the things around this fabulous organization. So Leah, let's go ahead and advance to the first slide.
There you go.
I'm going to throw out some numbers to folks on the presentation. And I think, as Becca mentioned, if you've got questions, put it either in the chat or the Q&A, and Becca and others, the Naspo team, will help us facilitate those questions at the end. So let's start. $6 trillion annually. Those are the losses that state governments are experiencing from cybersecurity breaches. $6 trillion. Right? Technology is ever evolving, and we are in a continuous losing war against cybersecurity. Since the 1980s, the federal government has been throwing out hundreds of billions of dollars in building defenses against cyber attacks. Systems are complex, they are rapidly changing and adapting. So if we're buying a system that is incredibly complicated, how do you think the procurement process is going to run? The procurement process is incredibly complicated. And the chief procurement officers and procurement officials on this webinar today can all attest, we struggle with technology on a daily basis, right? We live it, we breathe it, it's part of our daily lives, but when we have to buy technology, it's not like buying a pen or a pencil. How can you possibly ask and put out requirements to vendors in the marketplace to cover all the vulnerabilities that could be out there in operating systems, software, communications, networks. My CIO and my CISO, I will give a shout out to Fred Britton, Nate Williger, and our entire main IT team, because they help me to understand. I tell them what I want. I want to plug and play Nintendo Mario, right? I want to plug it in and I want it to work and I want to play my Mario. Well, my CIO and my CISO come back and tell me that that was 25 years ago. It's time to come into 2021 and it doesn't work like that anymore. I want ease of use, minimal restrictions, and they're telling me that I can't have that without thinking about all of the people's lives that are touched by technology. So all of that being said, I'm going to add one more layer. What about the vendors and the bidders that we have to talk with and partnership with on a daily basis? If the system's complicated, if the procurement's complicated, and all 50 states and the District of Columbia have a different process, a different statute, a different set of rules and regulations, how easy is it for vendors to provide what we want? It is almost impossible, right? So StateRAMP was formed. I'm going to turn it over to Leah in just a minute to talk a little bit more about StateRAMP, but the goal of this is to create some standardization around RFPs. Wait, let's pause for effect. I said it. Standardization in the RFP process across 50 states and the district, right? It's sort of an unheard of concept. I'm going to put it out there to say, I think StateRAMP takes us one step closer to standardization. We can meet minimum RFP requirements around cybersecurity. We can have some level of consistency throughout RFPs. And best yet, we have best value. We are protecting taxpayer dollars. We are improving security. And maybe we can keep some of that billions of dollars, some of the trillions of dollars that we lose every year, and spend it in a more effective way. So I want to pause there. Dugan, are there other thoughts or comments that you may have around the StateRAMP process and some of the problems and the goals that we're working towards?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I think you're exactly right. The problem of complexity and the lack of standardization, certainly in the RFP process, but it's bigger than that, because if you look at the states aren't all in the same place and there's security requirements. And then you look at the suppliers and they're not in the same place. Mm-hmm. And StateRAMP is really aimed at cloud service providers as Fedramp was. It's borrowed heavily from Fedramp, as you'll see in further slides. But if you talk to the cloud service providers, they're all in different places too. So it puts the state at a disadvantage when they are trying to negotiate their security requirements with a cloud service provider that wants to do things in a different way. We're on a call, actually, Lee and I were on a call earlier today where a state CISO had said, she always gets a situation where a supplier will say, well, we've got contracts in this state and that state, as though the state that they're talking to should modify their terms and conditions to that. The problem is that really makes it complex. And when the state is trying to buy their own system and they're trying to negotiate against these contractors who have their own definitions about what cloud security should be like, it really makes it complicated. So Fedramp began to untangle that for federal agencies by setting standards for compliance depending on the system that you were trying to buy and the workload and the type of information that was in it, to make sure that you had the security and data controls that were appropriate for the system. And so StateRAMP really is the same approach, where we want to provide different categories that most states can live with, that we can then begin to have kind of a standardization, not only in the RFP process, but in those security controls to make sure that we've got what we need. And ultimately, that will provide, I think, better outcomes for all the states by having kind of this standard approach with the minimum requirements identified and verified by certified third-party auditors who can do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that really is, if we can untangle that, bring some consistency to that, not only the security diversity, but the RFP diversity. That will help all of us.
Yep.
Next slide.
So that leads us to what is StateRAMP. And, you know, we've mentioned Fedramp a couple of times already, but just to make sure everyone's aware of what Fedramp is and why Fedramp doesn't solve this problem for states or local governments. So Fedramp, verification of vendor cybersecurity is required in the federal system through the creation of Fedramp. And so it is an agency within the federal government that verifies the service providers are complying with the federal government security requirements, and there's independent verification of that through their audits. But Fedramp authorization is only eligible for providers who have minimum contracts with federal agencies. And so we know, especially after the last year and a half of discovery and the journey that we've had, we know that there are a number of state or of vendors and providers who serve state and local government who don't do business with the federal government. So Fedramp is not an authorization path available to them. We also know that Fedramp does not share the continuous monitoring reporting or the controls audits or reports with outside of federal government, so with state and local governments who may be interested in reviewing those documentations. So with that gap in state and local government and the problems and the challenges and opportunities that Jamie and Dugan were just talking about, that's why StateRAMP was formed. So really it goes back to in early 2020, over a dozen kind of former and current state CIOs, CISOs, privacy officers, procurement officers, kind of joined with private industry and cybersecurity assessing organizations to charter StateRAMP. And so we spent most of 2020 just asking the question, what if we could come together to bring state and local government officials together and the vendors who serve them to recognize a common set of standards and therefore a common method for verifying cloud security. What would that look like? How would it work? How would it be governed? And so StateRAMP launched in January of this year as a nonprofit. We are organizing as a 501c6, which is a membership organization, with this idea of providing a common method for cloud security so that providers can verify once, and then through StateRAMP, which becomes a repository of those verifications that state and local governments can leverage. So you verify once and serve many. It is based on the widely accepted standards of NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, like Fedramp is, and it's also modeled in part after Fedramp by leveraging the third-party assessing organizations who conduct those independent audits. But it is really designed, and we'll talk about that as we go, for state and local governments with state and local governments in mind. So I'll hand it back over to Dugan and Jamie, because Dugan and Jamie have been part of that steering committee for the past year to talk about some of the guiding principles that we've really tried to kind of incorporate into the organizing documents and process.
So thanks, Lee. Now, the goal is here to create a security framework based on the NIST 853 cybersecurity framework, which the latest Deloitte NASIO poll said over 65% of the states have adopted. And to allow the StateRAMP organization to identify those key data and security controls that would apply to cloud service providers, and then to through StateRAMP to have a cadre of certified third-party auditors who will then go in and examine and look at the security controls in the cloud service providers to make sure that those cloud security controls are met. And if we've got the right sets of controls that are appropriate for the application you're going to put into cloud, then I think a state can rely that at least they know that the supplier is meeting those controls. Because we know, I mean, fundamentally, we know that cloud service providers, where it's in the cloud, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or software as a service, that you don't have the same access to see what's going on as you do at the on-premise data centers that we've had and used in the past. And as we move away from that, we need to have some way of having assurances that these cloud service providers actually are meeting these controls and continue to keep those in place. And that doesn't make life completely free of incidents, but it can certainly go a long way to mitigate those kinds of risks. So this framework, based on these NIST controls, works in the shared service model, where third-party certified auditors that have come in that have the credentials to audit these service providers can make sure that they are at the level that they represent to be. And then it's really implemented through the procurement process. So we're going to talk mostly from the procurement perspective as we work through this about well, how does that work? What's the playbook look like for the procurement organization if their state has said, yeah, we want to adopt these StateRAMP standards. And then the fact is that most of the states have used some of these controls, if not most of the 853 controls, but they don't always implement them in the same way. And so this gives them an approach and a model to, as a kind of a shared services model, to verify these levels of controls, so we'll know that the provider can meet those and has continuous monitoring to continue to keep those controls in place. It'll also provide a repository, really a centralized repository of information, not only of cloud service providers who are StateRAMP authorized or whatever level of approval they may be in, but also an inventory of clauses and tools and information that states can use as they move forward to put these clauses into their contracts and their RFPs. And finally, I think that the one thing I'd like to continue to kind of say here is that it's been, Lee mentioned it before, is that as this group has come together, and we'll talk about it in a later slide, it's been heavily oriented to state government use. It's bringing in this Fedramp concept and certainly some of the NIST controls from Fedramp, and it shares the moderate level and the low level of control with Fedramp, but it's being tailored to work in state government. And it's always asking the question about how does this work in state government and what's the need in state government. So while it's borrowed heavily from Fedramp, it is really focused and tailored to work within state government and will continue to be through its governance model. The one thing I like to kind of remember is what that RAMP stands for. And we put it in long, we've done away with the acronym here, and we said Risk and Authorization Management Program. And I also like to kind of think of it in terms of risk and audit management program, because what that does is it provides the ability of assessing risk, having the appropriate controls, and having a credentialed third-party auditor come in and make sure those controls are met as a way of mitigating risk. So I'll turn it back to Jamie. Anything to add, Jamie, before we go on to the next slide?
So Dugan, as you're talking, I feel like a CPO in a candy store, right? All the words you're saying just get me so excited about procurement. And I know that the other CPOs and procurement officials on this call would say the same thing. I just want to touch on a couple points that you said. This is set up not only for state governments, but for local governments, right? So many of the CPOs serve our local municipalities and other localities, universities, et cetera. They can also join. And so I'll defer to Leah if she wants to mention anything else about that. But what a terrific way to help cybersecurity be more secure in a local municipality type setting when they don't have all the resources that state government has. So I just want to put that out there for CPOs. This is something that can be dispersed throughout your state. You also talked about verify once, use many. When I hear that, I see dollar signs, but I see dollar signs going away because every bidder who is bidding on an RFP process, they expend amount of money and or resources to bid on that RFP. And it can be daunting and frustrating in utilizing all of those resources when it's just simply not necessary. And as a state CPO, I can assure you that those costs are getting passed on to the states in some way, shape, or form. So as a CPO, I feel like verify once and use many is also a cost savings measure for our taxpayer dollars. And then the last thing I would touch on that Dugan said is a way to verify the controls. When I hear that, I realize that there is a bridge being formed between state procurement and the state CIO or technology team, a bridge that may not have existed until just recently, right? When the procurement official is trying to buy technology, we can't do it without our Office of Information Technology staff, and vice versa. They can't buy anything without procurement. So when the two work together between the CIO, the CPO, the CISO, we end up with greater partnerships, more enhanced longer-term partnerships, greater cybersecurity practices, and we have to rely on the CIO and the CISO to set the minimum requirements as it relates to cybersecurity, but that can be difficult to do when we can't quite figure out what all of the requirements are in a particular system. So we rely on setting the minimum requirements as best we can, and then the vendor community can come back and inform us of what is possible. StateRAMP is just another tool in the toolkit to help enhance cybersecurity and a way for the procurement process to be a little bit more, here's the buzzword again, standardized. Yes. I think with that, Leah, I'll probably turn it back to you.
Sure. Well, I want to talk about how it works, but a couple of things that I thought of as we get into that is, we've had calls with about 800 vendors now, not all at once, but or not individually, some individually, but a lot in presentation formats like this. We've been holding webinars. And so, in talking with so many providers, I know that we've heard the challenges that they faced as well with one-off procurement requirements or this, SOC 2 report, here and a different audit there. And so the ability to have it standardized for them also allows them to focus their resources, I think, on truly verifying and working on that cloud security. And, our mission as StateRAMP as a nonprofit is really education. And we want to see providers improve their cyber postures and to help shift that culture to one of continuous improvement and continuous monitoring. And these one-time audits don't really get you there, but this process that recognizes the entire life cycle of the program or the contract that you have, I think where there is continuous monitoring so that you can make the risk-based decisions that are right for you. That's what StateRAMP is about. And so here's kind of a slide that just illustrates how does it work? We get that question. So as Dugan mentioned, we heard that most states, if not all, including local governments and higher eds that we've talked to, have adopted a cybersecurity framework based on NIST. So that's another buzzword you're hearing a lot today, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so that was the first place to start because it was a common, an area of commonality between the states was, hey, we've got this cybersecurity framework based on NIST. And most states, or many, have adopted policies that require their providers to comply with the cyber requirements. What StateRAMP does is allow that trust but verify. So it starts with a state or local government defining your cyber requirements for the service providers and requiring independent verification that they do comply. So verifying that compliance. So then to do that, the provider who wishes to do work with the state or local government would need to engage a third-party assessing organization. I said 3 PAOs. I've got 3 kids, 3 boys. We've watched a lot of Star Wars. So 3 PAO to me sounds like a Star Wars term. But 3 PAOs is an acronym you'll hear a lot in this kind of world of cybersecurity because it stands for third-party assessing organizations. So StateRAMP Steering Committee decided to leverage the Fedramp authorized 3PAO community that already exists. And there are 35 or 40 now, 3PAOs that are authorized by Fedramp. To be authorized by Fedramp, you have to be A2LA certified. They know NIST, they know how to verify against the controls. And so that made sense as a place to start. So any 3PAO who is Fedramp authorized can be a StateRAMP 3PAO. That third-party assessing organization then conducts an audit or assessment of the provider's cyber posture and provides that assessment to StateRAMP. StateRAMP manages the Program Management Office, the PMO, who has cybersecurity personnel who can review that audit and assessment and make a recommendation for a security status. StateRAMP, we will be maintaining a website. We'll have an authorized vendor list that is published and public on that website so that you can see at any time which providers have taken their offerings through a verification process. And I just want to pause on that because like Fedramp, Fedramp doesn't authorize companies. What they do is they authorize a product or an offering, right? So you have companies who may have Microsoft as an example, who has many products that have a Fedramp authorization. StateRAMP is the same. So depending on the offering that a provider wishes to have verified, that's what would be verified. And you can have many offerings in one environment if you wanted, but that's really up to how the provider wishes to handle their cyber security and their offerings. So that would be listed on StateRAMP. If you are an agency or a state who has adopted StateRAMP, meaning you're requiring that third-party verification and utilizing StateRAMP, we also can work with the Chief Information Security Officer or their designee to give them access, a secure account within our StateRAMP portal to have a dashboard view of continuous monitoring reporting in an ongoing basis. So if there is an issue that arises, if something changes, you're going to be notified right away. And that's the kind of information that is so very critical when we're talking about managing third-party risk, especially in cloud security, because cloud security, it's very dynamic. It changes every day. And so that continuous monitoring is really the difference maker here for a lot of security folks. So what that means for procurement, I'm going to kick it back to Jamie and Dugan, the experts in procurement, to talk about how this could be incorporated from a procurement standpoint.
Yeah, I'll touch on this quickly because I want Dugan, with all of Dugan's knowledge and experience from learning about other states and how Dugan has a much more broader perspective from a national level than I do. But I just want to start out on this slide from a procurement process perspective by telling everybody on this call something that we already know but should be on the forefront. RFPs are hard. Standardized RFPs are harder. And RFPs, when you're buying something new, innovative, or technology related, are the hardest. There are numerous vendors that have to be coordinated. There's numerous requirements, right? There's a whole host of things that have to be incorporated into one document, and then everything has to run like clockwork, right? At least that's what it feels like. That may not be necessarily true, right? We can move, we can adapt, we can be agile. But let's go back to the simplification, right? I want to buy a pencil. It's a number 2 pencil. It's yellow. It's got an eraser. Well, how many times does your CPO check in with you after 6 months and say, how'd that pencil work out for you? Still going strong, or do you need another one, right? It doesn't happen. Technology is the critical component where your CIO, your CIO's team checks in with you. Daily, minute by minute, quarterly, whatever the time frame may be, StateRAMP is part of that process as it relates to cybersecurity. So let's start right from the very beginning. The goal in an RFP when you want to buy something is to tell the vendor community, strike that, is to set the minimum requirements with your CIO or your CISO. What's acceptable from their perspective? What's going to keep the PII, the PHI secure? What's going to keep the data in a level that creates confidence within your constituents. Then you have to announce that to the vendor community. Tell them what you want to buy and tell them what you will accept. And then, right, once you get through the easy process, that's step 1 and 2, then you have to continue to work with your CIO and your CISO to do what? Here's the critical component and the $1 million trip up. It's evaluate your existing contracts. It's contract management. It's contract administration, right? It's working with your technology department and your procurement officer to make sure that those contracts go off without a hitch, that you are reevaluating on an annual basis to make sure that your vendors maintain their cybersecurity levels. So all of that being said, I just want to create that holistic approach as it relates to procurement and StateRAMP. We don't just use StateRAMP at the very beginning when we're putting the RFP together. StateRAMP is there and meant to be a partner throughout the duration of your vendor partnership with whatever software system you're buying. So I think it's probably an appropriate time for you to kind of go through some of the more lower level details that I think from a national perspective, we should be thinking about.
Well, thanks, Jamie. You know, one thing that Jamie's talked about, and I'm going to kind of lead off with that as well, is the importance of the partnership between the CPO's office and the CIO's office and the CISO when it comes to cybersecurity. But it's even more important than that when it comes to cloud solutions. Silos in the functional areas of government are problems in procurement, and there are no bigger problem areas in cloud because there are different policy owners that have a play in any contract for a cloud solution, and they really all have to be in the same boat and rowing in the same direction. And that's an area that's just critical. And if you're not doing that, it's going to be a problem in any cloud contract. And with StateRAMP, it really depends on that. So there's a relationship here in StateRAMP, a really strong relationship between the CIO's office, the CISO, and the procurement office, because they all have parts to play in this, and none of them can play it alone. They all have to kind of work together. And it actually is bigger than that. So let's take a look at it, though, from the procurement process. This is really trying to highlight the procurement perspective as we understand and kind of unpack this StateRAMP process. So these chevrons below are areas that the procurement office will want to focus on and will actually have a task and a work product in each of these areas. Maybe many tasks and work products, but these general areas have to be addressed in the RFP in order to implement StateRAMP. So the first one and the basic one in any procurement, and certainly in the case of technology systems, is to understand the requirements at the front end. What's the business challenge that you're trying to solve? What does this have to do? What's the performance you're looking for? But to understand that in the context of a cloud solution provider with not just the CISO and not just the CIO, but very importantly with the business owner as well. And so when looking at an application that's going to be built in the cloud or something that's going to be migrated to the cloud, and then it's really important at the very beginning to understand what the control requirements are. So when I say control requirements, that is what is the state standards? What requirements, if they've adopted NIST 853, which controls have they adopted and how are they implemented? So understanding what that business need is, what that outcome you're trying to accomplish with this contract will then help you decide what sets of controls are important for you. With that, and we actually have it a couple of slides later, there's a tool that, really the beginning of a tool that StateRAMP has developed to help determine what data classification makes sense, to help you understand what controls you need to have in place. So that's important. So after you decide what those controls are, then the next step is really then based on those controls to identify which StateRAMP impact category you're looking at. If you're familiar with Fedramp, it would be Fedramp low, Fedramp moderate, or Fedramp high. In this case with StateRAMP, and we'll go through these in more detail, the three basic controls now are number one, which is which is pretty much parallel with Fedramp low. Number 2, which is Fedramp low plus some controls. And number 3, at this point, is Fedramp moderate. And then as StateRAMP matures, there will be other controls and it will go out to a high level. But based on the input from CISOs and the people on the steering committee that provide feedback, those controls made the most sense. So it's after deciding which control requirements you need for this cloud solution you're looking at, then identify, are you going to be 1, are you going to be StateRAMP low, or are you going to be StateRAMP low plus? Which category do you need? And so that will all be specified in the RFP. You'll put that in your requirements of the RFP. The next thing is to identify the security status level. We're going to talk more about what that is, but essentially, kind of in a nutshell, it's 5 different levels of readiness that a provider has. So the highest level is that they've been authorized. They meet all the controls, they've been certified by third party, and they're set to go. The lowest level is just they're in the kind of the ready stage to be, they're active and ready to submit to be considered to be in the ready stage. So we'll go into more detail on that. But that's important because you'll want to know at the point you are ready to award the contract or issue notice to proceed on the contract, what level do you want that provider to be at? Because this is new, some of these will be really suppliers in their product will be evolving, and they'll be working, they'll be ready, and then they'll be in the process stage, but they won't quite be authorized. So maybe you'll want them to be authorized before you issue notice of intent to award. So you'll have to decide what stage you want and what level you want them at. And you'll get feedback from StateRAMP and the third-party audit organizations on where they set in that. And then the last thing that you'll want to also include in the contract document, the RFP, is setting the requirements for continuous monitoring. So what I mean by that is it's not just, well, I'm ready right now, and as the way it stands right now, as I submit my proposal, I meet these controls. Well, no, you want them to hold those controls in place and continue to meet them through the life of the contract. So you'll set that in the RFP development. So all of these 5 areas will be set, there'll be clauses written around them, and they'll be rolled into the contract. The evaluation award, you'll want to confirm that the impact level in compliance is met by the supplier, and you'll have help from the StateRAMP PMO office, which Lee will talk a little bit about later, and then the third-party assurance organization, because they'll be reporting on that as well. And then finally, in the contract administration stage, like Jamie was talking about, you'll want that continuous monitoring and feedback, both on reports from the cloud service provider, also the annual follow-up report on the controls and by the third-party auditor, and then also by a StateRAMP. So that's kind of a picture of how that procurement process at a very high level fits into it. The other thing that StateRAMP is planning, and I think they're going to be in a great position to do this, is to help develop model terms and conditions that you might consider. And I think they realize that there's an opportunity here to help. Arizona is piloting this now. They're the first state out of the box for the pilot. And it's not such a big stretch for them because they really were working with an Arizona ramp program modeled pretty much on the Fedramp program. So very similar to what the StateRAMP program is doing. So they're going to pilot that, and we'll have some lessons learned from that, including some clauses out of their contracts that could go into this. So there'll be a repository that StateRAMP will be able to make available as people begin to construct their RFPs and look for model clauses. Jamie, do you have any follow-up on that, or should we turn this over to Lee for the next slide?
I will just add one additional follow-up, which my CIO kindly reminded me of. When we're setting the minimum requirements in an RFP, we're working with the CIO, we're working with the CISO. I like to call this, we're lovingly stopping people from running with scissors, right? So vendors aren't just out there wavering around with their scissors trying to figure out what to do. The CISO and the CIO aren't trying to figure out requirements. Everybody's working together, and we have taken the scissors away from the appropriate folks. So I think with that, Leah, the security impact levels are really critical, and talking a little bit more about those
That's right.
categories.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And Dugan, you alluded to this. So once a state or service provider has made the decision to list a product on StateRAMP's authorized vendor list, to do that, you've got to be verified, right? And so you need to first start with at which impact level are you going to start with? And if you're not familiar with impact levels, Fedramp has impact levels as well. But generally, the higher the impact level, the more sensitive the data, the more confidential the data, or the more critical the system is to the continuity of government. So Fedramp, for example, has 3 levels with low, moderate, and high. We did evaluate all of those levels, and it was important to the steering committee that we align somewhat with Fedramp, because we heard states and locals that were starting to look at that already. And we know that there are providers who are already Fedramp authorized and wanted to offer that path for reciprocity. So in StateRAMP, we are launching with really 2 primary categories, Category 1 and Category 3. So Category 1 aligns pretty closely with your Fedramp low control baselines. You can actually see all of these controls. If you go to stateramp.org/document, we have a summary of baseline controls that you can see and actually look at those requirements. And then Category 3 aligns to Fedramp moderate. And like I said, Fedramp Category 1 at the low end is probably going to align more with your generally public available information, or just kind of maybe systems of a less criticality. Category 3 is generally going to align to more confidential data. So for providers who are utilizing IaaS, SaaS, or PaaS solutions to process, store, and or transmit data such as PII, PCI, and PHI as examples. Category 2 is one that we want to do a little more discovery around. So a couple of things that we heard as we were going through the committee process and having all these subcommittee meetings in 2020 was that there may be a desire for sort of a low mod hybrid, right? We heard from some state CISOs who said there are some situations where maybe it's a system that, yes, it has PII, but it's less, I'm going to say, sensitive PII. Maybe it's email addresses that is stored versus, health information. And so perhaps that CISO is comfortable with not requiring Category 3, but they want something more than that Category 1. They want something more than that low impact. We also heard from some CISOs who said, if we've got a system that maybe it does store or transmit or process generally publicly available information, but it plugs into another system that is highly sensitive. That's another example where we heard from some who said, I might want something more than Category 1, but I don't need to go all the way to, moderate or Category 3 impact. So Category 2 was born out of those discussions. We if you're not familiar with NIST 800-53 Rev 4, and there is a Rev 5 out now, that's basically a catalog of controls. So someone, I think, had asked, give me an example of a control. And so I just had pulled up, access controls is a good example. So do you have controls in place and its policies, as well as are you actually, what an audit's going to look at is, are you actually doing what you say you do in your policies? So have you been thoughtful about who has permissions within your system, and are the appropriate practices in place? So that's an example of when we say control, what we mean. But Category 2 is one where we're going to really just be trying to learn more and watch kind of what the needs are as we launch StateRAMP this year, to understand if that is a category that would be of value to state and local governments. I know we've had the question about Fedramp reciprocity. Yes, we are developing a process so that those who already have a Fedramp authorized product can, there is reciprocity provided for StateRAMP. There are a couple of things that need to happen to be listed on StateRAMP's authorized vendor list. And so we do have a webinar actually scheduled for this Friday for providers who, if you're out there and you've got Fedramp products, go to stateramp.org/events, attend that webinar, or contact us so we can get you connected to allow for that reciprocity to happen. The other note that I just want to kind of cover here is we heard the desire for additional flexibility to be there. We know that, you know, we're just getting started, that we had a good framework to look at and to adapt to with Fedramp that's out there and the NIST requirements. But I will tell you, I've had one-on-one calls with dozens and dozens of states. I've talked to higher ed and locals, and you know, there are some other areas of commonality. I know Jamie Dugan and I have talked about this as well, where, you know, states will say, well, what do I do? Or do you have something that maps to CGIS requirements or MARSI 2.0 or IRS pub? You know, what can map to that? I can tell you that getting started, we wanted to start where there was the most common set of agreement, and that really was around NIST as a cybersecurity framework for cloud security. So that's where we're beginning. But if some of the agencies that we've spoken with, if you know that there are additional controls, if you said, hey, I think I can comply with our CGIS requirements by requiring category 3 plus a few additional controls, you have the flexibility to do that. But it goes back to the RFP stage where you need to identify those additional requirements up front so that the auditing, the third-party assessing organizations can audit against that. And then that would be something that we could validate and continuously monitor going forward. So data classification tool, I'm going to give Jamie all the credit for this brainchild. I think it was early on. It may have been April or May of 2020 in the meetings when Jamie said, hey, you know what would be really nice is if we had a questionnaire we could walk through for every RFP. And so that sent us on, I don't know how many times this was iterated and amended, but we spent last year coming up with this questionnaire. And you probably, as a state, you probably have a data classification tool. Many states have adopted data classification tools. What we tried to do is just kind of streamline it to get that conversation started. So that it gives you a place to start. So these are the types of questions. If you go to stateramp.org/documents, you can see the entire document. This is a snapshot of it, but it is intended to help procurement, providers, others have a place to start to ask questions to understand which impact level is required for this system or for your procurement right up front. Jamie, I saw you smile. Anything to add here?
I would only add briefly that as these slides are shared, every procurement official should print this out, have it in their office when they're looking at an RFP, they're looking at their contract, before you hit speed dial to the CISO and say, well, what level category is this? What should this be for cybersecurity? Look at this absolutely fantastic tool. It should be hanging right on your wall. So really kudos to you, Leah, and the team for putting this together. This will really help standardize for procurement to ask the questions, what needs to be in the contract or RFP document?
Well, I can tell you so much input went into this. I think our steering committee as a full committee evaluated it at least 3 times. Dugan, I know you were on some of our subcommittee calls when we looked at this. And I do think this is something that will iterate over time as we continue to learn more and have the ability to incorporate other areas of commonality into it. But it is the first step for standardization, I would agree. So security status progression. This could be a presentation all on itself to talk about the requirements. And in fact, it is. If you're interested, go to stateramp.org/events and we'll go into more detail. But there are 3 milestone statuses that include ready, authorized, and provisional. Ready is a status. It does not require a government sponsor or anyone to be involved, a provider who wishes to become StateRAMP ready, this is kind of the first step. And to become ready, a service provider, if you've got a service provider that's StateRAMP ready, it means they have met the minimum mandatory requirements to be ready. They probably have most, if not all, of their policies written and adopted. They've had an independent audit by a 3PAO to conduct a readiness assessment. So in that readiness assessment, the 3PAO is attesting that yes, this provider does meet the minimum mandatory requirements. And so you can have some confidence in working with a provider who's StateRAMP ready, in that this is a provider who's likely going to be able to progress to full authorization, and it's a provider who's done that beginning work. You can find the ready requirements on stateramp.org/documents. There is a document there that is entitled, I believe, minimum mandatory requirements for ready. And this is that first status. For authorized, to be authorized or provisional, we do require a government sponsor, and that can really just be an agency or a state or a local who's working with a cloud service provider or a provider utilizing the cloud product to be that kind of second set of eyes, really. So we have I mentioned the Program Management Office, the PMO. That PMO is going to be involved at all of these statuses along the way in that review, as well as for continuous monitoring. And the steering committee felt that was important because we wanted to make sure that there was consistent application of the standards across the board. So that PMO review gives you that consistency. But remember, this is government-led. So a majority of, I don't know if I mentioned this, but a majority of our board members are state and local government employees or officials. A majority of our committee members are from state and local government. And so we wanted the state and local governments also, and primarily states, to be involved in that authorized and provisional decision. So in authorized, here's what that looks like. The service provider who's authorized, they would, this is a provider who has met all of the requirements by impact level. They've got their policies and documentation completed. They've had a third-party assessing organization conduct a security assessment review. It's been provided to StateRAMP PMO. The StateRAMP PMO has reviewed it and says, yes, we agree. They take that recommendation and the documentation to the sponsoring government, who then says, yes, we agree as well. That's how a provider would become StateRAMP authorized. Now let's say provisional. Let's say a provider has gone through that process and maybe they just don't meet all of the controls, are almost there. The StateRAMP PMO in that situation is unlikely to recommend an authorized status, but the sponsoring government could say, hey, they've got a POAM in place, they're working toward authorization, we want to list them as provisional. And so the government has the ability to do that. So these are our 3 milestone statuses. Make sure I kind of covered everything. One thing I wanted to note, I get this question a lot, so you might be thinking it right now, is how long does it take to achieve a StateRAMP ready status or a StateRAMP authorized status? I'm going to speak very, very generally. Here's the time frame we're working with. Would be StateRAMP ready in 6 months, StateRAMP authorized in 12. There are so many caveats to that. If you've got a provider who's already done a lot of this work, has policies in place, they may become StateRAMP ready or StateRAMP authorized faster. On the flip side, if you have a provider who maybe they're working with a legacy code or a legacy system, or they just haven't designed with cybersecurity in mind, it's going to take a little bit longer. Our goal is to help providers be successful. We want providers to be able to improve their cyber postures and achieve the statuses that they are trying to attain. Also, if there are more controls to audit against, that could take a little bit more time as well. So those are the caveats I think in mind, or I would keep in mind. Dugan mentioned the state of Arizona. They are the first state to announce they're adopting the requirement for third-party verification using StateRAMP. And so some of the things that we've talked to them and others about is the need to allow enough runway for providers to be able to be compliant. This isn't something you can turn it on tonight and tomorrow everyone's suddenly authorized. So we want to make sure that there's enough runway for providers to be able to learn about this and to be able to become compliant and verify. So the way that the state of Arizona is contemplating this and incorporating it into their procurement process is that they would require a provider to become StateRAMP, to be StateRAMP ready at the time the contract is being awarded and that service is beginning. So before the provider is, touching the data or beginning the service for the state, they need to be StateRAMP ready. I will say StateRAMP ready aligns pretty closely to their as ramp process now, as Dugan mentioned. So StateRAMP ready at time that that contract begins, and then become authorized within 12 months of contract execution. So there's time to become authorized. Providers don't have to become ready before authorized. If they are ready to go straight to authorized, you can do that as well.
Leah, I would just add to that in terms of timing, right? CPOs frequently get the pushback. Well, it takes so long to RFP for technology, right? We've all heard the same song and dance, but it's not the procurement process oftentimes that takes the long time. It is frequently not only the negotiations, but also it's the planning. So if the CPO, the CIO, and the agency, the business need can have the conversation up front to identify what is acceptable from a timeline, right? It doesn't have to be authorized StateRAMP the time the document hits the streets. If we're going to give them 12 months to become authorized, great. What's your backup plan if the vendor doesn't hit the 12 months? Are we going to allow for a 3-month extension? Can StateRAMP provide some additional commentary throughout the process to keep the state government informed? So again, I just want to go back to that buzzword that we've heard so much, which is partnership. And it is continuous monitoring and checking in frequently. Yep. So as we go on to the next slide, I know we only have about 5 minutes left. We want to make sure that we hit the highlights. Awesome. And I think Becca said we do have a couple questions. So as we talk about continuous monitoring.
So one thing that is different, and I can speak to it on this slide as well, between FedRAMP and StateRAMP, if you have any familiarity between the two, is that, like I said, StateRAMP's mission is education. So what you'll see in our documentation and our guidance documents is just more helpful resources and samples, right? So that we want there to be, we want providers to have kind of the resources they need to be successful. And we are in the process of finalizing those documentations now so that those will be published in April and assessments can begin in the second quarter. Continuous monitoring is required. You can read more about this on stateramp.org/documents in the Conmon guide, but there is continuous monitoring that does include an annual audit. Okay, just moving quickly along. This is a fun example of what the StateRAMP authorized vendor list would look like. This is what would be available on the StateRAMP website. And I think I mentioned that in addition to this, if you're a StateRAMP adopting organization, you're working with StateRAMP, then your CISO or whoever's assigned in your agency, or if it's enterprise-wide, would have access to kind of the secure portal for that Conmon reporting as well. But this is what you would find on the public website. So you could see the provider, what's the product or offering, service model, the security status, impact level we've talked about, the government sponsor. One more thing you'll notice, there are a couple of security statuses here that we didn't talk about. And this was really important to the steering committee to be able to show the progression of that security status progress that's being made. And so active, pending, and in process are some other statuses you would see. Active is kind of pre-ready. Pending means the ready report has been submitted and is in queue or under review now. And then in process is sort of a pre-authorized. They're in the process of working with a 3PAO.
Maybe we should wrap up on the last 2 slides around government membership and provider membership, which really talks about
it
who pays
does.
here.
So the government membership, I mentioned that we are organizing as a 501c6. So certainly individuals like Jamie and others can be members of StateRAMP. If you fill out info, if you go to info at stateramp.org, or if you go to stateramp.org and just fill out a form, you're going to get information, start receiving information from StateRAMP. There is no fee for government to participate. At the organizational level, I've referred to this a little bit. This could be at an enterprise level or an agency level or a local government. There's no cost for government to participate. So it is open to state and local government. We would have a membership agreement. The agency, kind of states the agency would be requiring third-party verification for their cloud security using StateRAMP. And then that StateRAMP would be providing a secure account for that ConMon reporting. So this is the government membership. And then for provider membership. So providers, there is a fee to participate. So StateRAMP membership, vendors may join as what we call subscriber members for an annual fee that's at the organization level of $500. And this is what funds StateRAMP. So it provides access to education, to the templates, to the resources and the things that we've talked about, and the ability to list products as verified on the authorized vendor list. So then to be listed on the authorized vendor list, you've got to comply with all the requirements we talked about. And then there is a fee paid to the PMO for that activity of the ready review, the authorization review, and the annual fee for continuous monitoring. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So
yeah, Leah, do you want to show the slide with the board of directors and steering committee? And then
sure.
Becca can come on and maybe talk us through some of the questions. For the CPOs on the call today, I think it's really important just to take note. While many of the folks that you see in front of you have an IT component, what I think is so critical is that procurement had a voice in this process. So between Dugan, myself, Steve, and others, we had an eye for procurement in mind when we were thinking about this process. So I'll pause there. Becca, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we sure do. So let me just go through here. One that I thought we should address real quick is somebody said, how will this new StateRAMP process affect current NASPO agreements or any new NASPO agreements and RFPs to come?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, so it won't have any impact on current existing contracts. Our cloud solution provider, all of those providers and those products follow the Cloud Security Alliance matrix. And so in some ways that third-party certification, or in the case of Cloud Security Alliance, it allowed for a self-attestation. So that's the process that was followed. That contract won't change. But going forward, any cloud services contract that Naspo Value Point issued would be issued under a state, lead state. And if that lead state has adopted a policy for StateRAMP compliance, to follow StateRAMP as a standard, or chooses to use StateRAMP for that RFP, then that would be something that would allow for us to use the StateRAMP requirement.
Yeah, good question. Becca, do we have any?
Yeah, let's do two more. So here's a quick one. Are you expecting Fedramp to supplant StateRAMP in federally funded programs?
It hasn't so far, because Fedramp is ran by GSA and a requirement for federal agencies to use. And so while some states use it, will require Fedramp, not all have to have. And so in this case, I don't think it will. It's possible that states will use it in lieu of that federal requirement.
Okay, and let's do this last one. Contract-wise, vendor SaaS contracts are fairly standardized and provided to the customer in a click-through. Is this going to be recommended by StateRAMP to utilize a click-through contract?
Well,
Dugan, I think you're probably best to answer this, but let me just say, I hate click-through contracts. Because we should be thinking about what we are signing. If we're just clicking, are we just doing an automated process, or are we thinking about the terms and conditions and the provisions that are binding the two parties? So, Dugan, do you want to elaborate?
Well, yeah, so SaaS is a form of cloud. It's one of the 3 service models defined by NIST, and these controls would apply to a SaaS provider as well. So if a state agency were applying the controls to a SaaS solution, then that solution, in order to be responsive, would have to be authorized at some point and meet the appropriate control requirements established by the state.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you guys so much. You guys have been a great team. This has been a really fun and very informative. So we just want to say thanks to our presenters and to all of our attendees. And for all of us who joined you today, just make sure you complete the questionnaire as you exit. And that's your chance to tell us how to do better and what other topics to cover. You can get a hold of Leah at stateramp.org. She's there to answer questions, or you can hit us up here at Naspo. And everybody who attended will get a copy of the slide deck and all of the contacts that we've got there. And I think there was a mention of the events that you all are going to do too. So we'll make sure that that's there, and you'll get a certificate for contact hours if you need that. And again, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. This is going to be a great program.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Bye.